My name is Valentina Carter. I'm 34 years old and I currently live with my husband on a small farm in Kansas. A place full of sun, wind, and whispers I'll never forget. On our wedding day, my sister stood in front of 200 guests and scoffed. Who would have thought Valentina would marry a potato-digging farmer? Everyone laughed. And me, I just stood there, clutching a glass of water, my heart clawed open. Have you ever been looked down on by your own family? Just because you chose a life that didn't look like theirs? If you've ever been laughed at for living authentically, leave a comment below. Tap like if you believe a person's worth isn't tied to a title. And don't forget to subscribe, because what they never saw coming is already on its way. Let me tell you what happened after that remark, and why they had to kneel before the very field they once called a worthless patch of dirt. 3 years after our wedding, I found myself at another family gathering I should have declined. But Lucas said it was my mother's 60th birthday and he didn't want me to have regrets. I had prepared a jar of homemade strawberry jam from our backyard garden, wrapped carefully in linen and tied with a red ribbon. I didn't have an expensive gift, only sincerity. But in my family, sincerity has never been something people valued. The party was held in the backyard of my sister's suburban Chicago mansion. Blue stone pool, string lights twinkling, and dresses chosen to match the table linens. Lindsay looked like the centerpiece of a fashion launch, not our mother's birthday. She wore a tight-fitting white dress, loose waves in her hair, and a smile like she'd just closed a $1 million deal. When I arrived, holding my jar of jam and Lucas placing 2 bottles of hard cider on the table, Lindsay turned, her eyes scanning me like a quality control officer spotting a defect. "Oh, what's this?" she asked loudly, making sure the group gathered around the buffet heard. "Homemade? Strawberry jam? Still haven't figured out what real value means, huh?" I froze for just a second, then calmly placed the jar next to the glossy 3-tier fondant cake and turned to smile. "I believe real value comes from what you make with your own hands," I replied. "From the earth, from sweat, and from gratitude." A chuckle rang out behind me. My brother Derek was pouring drinks with his wife Heather. He wore a crisp navy shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal a gleaming gold watch. Heather leaned into his arm and chuckled like I'd just told a toddler's joke. "Still living in Kansas?" Derek asked. "How much do you make from carrots and organic eggs again?" Before I could answer, Heather chimed in. "Actually, I'm looking for an organic produce supplier for my friend's restaurant in Miami. But well, I think they're aiming for something a little more professional than, hobby farm stuff." Lucas gently squeezed my hand under the table. His expression stayed steady as always. No blushing, no anger, just a slight lean forward and a calm voice. "We don't farm as a hobby," he said. "We do it because we believe in sustainable agriculture, clean food, and real value. And if we can live honestly and with enough, that's success to us." Lindsay narrowed her eyes. "Enough, huh? Then why aren't you wearing a new dress for Mom's big day? Isn't that the same cotton thing you wore to your wedding?" I looked down. The linen dress I wore was indeed the same one from my wedding, but not because I didn't have others. I wore it because it was light, breezy, perfect for summer sun, and it matched how I felt. Simple and comfortable. I didn't respond to Lindsay. Anything I said would have just become more fuel for her amusement. My mother sat at a round table near the decorative palm trees. She looked at me, then quickly away like my gaze was something she had to avoid. She still had that habit, silence instead of defense, like when I was 12 and Lindsay falsely accused me of stealing a bracelet. "Lucas," my father walked up and clapped him on the shoulder. "Still doing what is it again?" "Watering plants. Tilling dirt." Lucas smiled. "I manage a closed-loop cultivation system. We're developing water-saving crop cycles, soil regeneration, and data-driven harvesting." My father blinked, then burst into laughter. "You should be in agriculture commercials. Sounds like a documentary." None of them knew the field behind our house was where Lucas developed a precision irrigation system, a tool that had reduced water use by over 40% compared to traditional methods over the past 3 years. None of them knew we'd partnered with a soil analytics company to test seasonal yield algorithms. No one wanted to know, because to them we were still just a couple of poor rustic nobodies. The party continued. Adults laughing, kids running across the lawn, the clinking of plates mixed with soft jazz. I found a quiet spot under a tree, but before I could settle, Lindsay approached again. She held a pink cocktail in one hand, the other resting on my shoulder like she was prepping a speech. "I don't say this to insult," she began, her voice low. "It's just, you have potential. In college, you were top of your department, right? You could have been an environmental consultant, maybe even worked for the Department of Energy. And now, where are you? On a nameless farm." I turned to meet her gaze. "That farm is home. It's where I grow food that nourishes people. It's where I've built a system that can help thousands of other farmers thrive." She laughed softly, almost pitying. "If that helps you sleep at night, I won't stop you." "You're not the one who needs to understand," I said. "I do. And Lucas does." She walked off. I turned back toward the patio where Lucas was talking to Uncle Tom, the only relative of mine who still asked how we were doing. They were discussing ways to restructure soil layers to prevent erosion. Lucas was always patient. He never felt the need to prove himself like I did. He let time speak for him. I stood there, among the laughter and warm lights, the snide remarks and watchful stares, and I understood, within this family I had never truly belonged. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not wounded like before. There was only a quiet certainty deep within. They would never see us for who we really are. But one day they'd have to look again, because nothing stays buried forever. Not truth. Not worth. Not the dignity of someone who was once dismissed. And that day was closer than they thought. About half a year after my mother's birthday party, things started getting oddly quiet. My mother's calls became infrequent. In the past, even if her tone felt a little forced, she still called to tell me Lindsay had been invited to another TV segment, or that Derek was investing in some new resort out in Nevada. But now a whole month passed, no call, no text. I reached out a few times and only got short replies like, "Super busy, sweetie," or "in a meeting." Lucas noticed it first. "What's going on with Donna?" he asked one evening while we were checking the irrigation system in the West Garden. I frowned, looking at the touchscreen displaying soil moisture data. "What do you mean?" "Well, she used to call to ask about your strawberry variety. Now nothing. Not that I'm worried. Just odd." I stayed quiet, a weight settling in my chest. Then I brushed it off, reassuring myself. Maybe she was traveling, or maybe helping Lindsay with the kids. I always found a reason not to think the worst. Until I got an unexpected call from Molly, my best friend since college. She worked at a private bank in Chicago. Usually we talked about new jam recipes, her newborn puppies, and everyday stuff. But that day her voice was different. "Val, you got a minute?" I set my planner down, stepped away from my computer. "I'm here. What's going on?" "Well, this is a little delicate. But I think you need to know." My heartbeat slowed. I walked out of the converted barn office to the porch where the wind was gently sweeping through our pumpkin patch. "Listen to me, okay? I can't disclose the details. Doing so would violate professional ethics. But our bank has a few clients with names identical to your parents and Derek. Their accounts have been frozen. Temporarily, yes, but it's due to a federal investigation." I tightened my grip on the phone. "An investigation? For what?" "Improper investment transactions. Looks like it's related to a private fund Derek's been running. I can't be 100% sure, but the numbers are huge." I went silent. "How huge?" "I really shouldn't say, but Val, I think we're talking millions." I don't remember exactly how I thanked Molly. I only remember walking straight out to the backfields afterward. Lucas was installing a CO2 monitor next to the rows of mustard greens. I stood there for a long time before he turned and looked at me. "What's wrong?" I opened my mouth, but my throat was dry. I just held the phone out and showed him the call log. "Molly." He nodded. "What did she want?" "Derek. My parents. Looks like they're under investigation. Illegal transactions. My dad's bank account is frozen." Lucas sat down on the porch step, resting his elbows on his knees. He didn't look surprised or panicked. Just thoughtful, like part of him had already expected this. "You saw it coming?" I asked. "I knew Derek was into risky investments. I just didn't think he'd go this far." I sat beside him. My hands trembled, not out of fear but from a strange mix of sadness and bitter clarity. They used to laugh in my face for living off the land. And now those same people are sinking in the dirt they dug for themselves. Lucas didn't say a word. He just placed his hand gently on my shoulder, light as an early autumn breeze. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the wooden ceiling, moonlight spilling through the curtain cracks in jagged streaks. Faces swirled in my mind. My mother with that gaze that always hovered between pity and disappointment. My father with his judgment-heavy tone. Derek proud of the numbers he manipulated in the market. Lindsay with that smug smile every time I said something that came from the heart. I thought about all the times I'd been mocked for choosing a different life. All the times I'd been left out of family chats, uninvited to gatherings, just because I had nothing flashy to show off. But was it true that I had nothing? I had Lucas, the quiet man who was always there, steady as bedrock. I had this land, which nourished not just the two of us, but served as the foundation for dozens of clean farming research projects Lucas had spearheaded. I had misty mornings hanging over the vegetable beds, the buzzing of bees by my ear, the scent of fresh soil after the rain. I had all the things they'd never have, because they were too busy chasing the shimmering illusion of prestige. And now, as that light flickered out, they were slipping into darkness without a clue how to find their way back. I knew it wouldn't be long before they came to me. Not to check in. Not to apologize. But to ask for something. And when that day came, I wasn't sure if there would be enough room left in my heart to let them in again. That night, just after a heavy downpour, my phone rang. The screen flashed with a name I hadn't marked as priority in a long time, Lindsay. I stared at it for a while, thumb hovering between accept and decline. Finally, I slid to answer. Val. Her voice was shaky, nothing like her usual sharpness. Can you come to the house? Please? And bring Lucas. I held my breath. What's going on? I can't explain over the phone. But, please. As soon as you can. I didn't ask further. Not because I wanted to help, but because I needed to know what they were hiding. I called Lucas, told him to grab a jacket. Night had fully settled by then, and the road to my parents' house felt strangely quiet. Familiar, but with no welcome at the end. Lucas didn't ask anything. Every now and then he glanced at me, his eyes silently saying, I'm here. We arrived around 8 p.m. The large house sat in its upscale neighborhood, but this time no twinkling lights. The front door was ajar. I stepped in, the sound of my shoes tapping on the hardwood floors echoing in the silence. The scent of rosewater mixed with wine and unease. My father stood in the middle of the living room, gripping the back of an armchair, his face flushed. My mother sat on the sofa, hands tightly clasped as if trying to keep her heart from shattering. Lindsay was curled up in a corner, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Derek wasn't there. I guessed he was hiding somewhere, too ashamed to face us. Valentina, my father said, his voice hoarse and sharp. You're here. I nodded, pulling Lucas to sit beside me. No one had invited us to sit, but I didn't need an invitation. What's going on? I asked. Lindsay kept her head down, hair falling over half her face. My mother tried to speak, but my father cut her off with a raised hand. We'll be direct, he declared. Derek's in trouble. I didn't respond, just waited for more. His investment firm, it's being sued. Major procedural errors, accounting issues. Seems like some clients are filing lawsuits. The amount isn't small. How much is not small? Lucas asked, his tone as steady as always. My father turned to him as if measuring a servant who had dared interrupt. Over 8 million. My chest tightened, but I kept my face neutral. What does this have to do with us? I asked. Lindsay lifted her head. The firm's about to collapse. Without upfront payment, the lawyers won't touch it. The house is mortgaged. Savings accounts are frozen. The farmland is the only asset still in a family member's name that holds value. I stared at her, waiting for the rest. Came quickly. I was hoping you could sell it. Or at least use it as collateral to get liquid cash. To help. The room grew stifling. I smiled faintly, not out of amusement but because of the lump rising in my throat. You mean the same land you once called a nameless patch of dirt? The one where every time we brought over strawberries, you cringed like we'd handed you something infected? And now it's your only hope. Valentina, my mother spoke that night. You've misunderstood. This is family. We need to put the past aside to help each other. Put it aside? I echoed. Did you think of the past when you excluded me from everything important? When Dad told Aunt Mary the first chose to live on barren dirt? When Lindsay left me out of Ellie's birthday because she didn't want guests to be uncomfortable with the country smell? I've put it aside long ago. But it seems like I only exist to you when you need something. My father slammed his hand on the armrest so hard it startled my mother. Enough. This isn't the time to tally up who said what. This is life or death. Lucas gently squeezed my hand. Actually, he said, we're not planning to sell any part of the land. It's our home, our work, the result of years of dedication. Lindsay burst into tears. So you're just going to stand by and let the whole family fall apart over a few rows of vegetables? I turned and looked straight into her eyes. It's not about vegetables. It's about the fact that you were the one who taught me this lesson. Never expect compassion from those who once laughed at your pain. My mother stood up, came closer, her eyes shimmering. Sweetheart, we're family. Being family doesn't mean sharing assets, I replied calmly. We're farmers, not a bank. Silence swept over the room. I stood up, held Lucas's hand, and walked out of the house that was once a home, now nothing more than a shell smeared with greed. Rain had started to fall lightly, and the scent of damp earth stirred something deep within me. Something sharp, something awakening. I knew tonight wasn't the end. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of a truth they weren't ready to face. We left my parents' house in silence. On the drive home, Lucas didn't say a word. Neither did I. Outside, the drizzle seemed to fill the thick space between us. But I wasn't angry with him. In fact, I needed the quiet. Not to avoid the truth, but to sort through the storm inside me. As soon as we turned onto the dirt road leading to the farm, Lucas suddenly pulled over and turned off the engine. He didn't look at me right away. He stared out into the pitch-black fields ahead. The headlights lit up a patch of wet grass. You doing okay? He asked in a quiet, steady voice. A little overwhelmed, I admitted. But I'm fine. He nodded slightly, then opened the door. Come with me for a minute. I raised an eyebrow but followed him. Lucas led me past the main house, through the backyard garden, and stopped in front of the old storage shed near the chicken coop. I passed this shed every day. I always thought it just held garden tools, organic fertilizer bins, maybe an old tiller or two. It was always locked, the key hanging from a rusty hook under the porch. I'd never thought much of it. Just another part of farm life. Lucas pulled out a ring of keys from his pocket, selected one with a green plastic cap and unlocked the door. The wooden door creaked dryly as he pushed it open. Inside, the smell of dampness and old wood mixed with the scent of paper and machinery. His phone flashlight swept across the room, landing on a long work table stacked with documents, cardboard boxes, computers, and sketches pinned all over the walls. I stood frozen, confused about what I was looking at. Val, he said, there are some things. I think it's time you knew. I stepped inside and sat down on a wooden chair by the table, my eyes fixed on the thick folders. Lucas pulled out a yellow folder, placed it in front of me, then grabbed another stack from a drawer beneath. TerraCore AgTech, he said. It's a company I founded 6 years ago. I frowned. That name sounds familiar. I thought it was just the name of your pilot project. It is a project and a company. I registered it as a separate legal entity. I'm the founder. This land, the irrigation systems, the seed trials, everything here is TerraCore's RD Foundation. I said nothing, just looked down at the file he opened. The first page was an official document stamped in red. Patent number 108473992, Terrain Adaptive Precision Irrigation System. Inventor, Lucas Nathaniel Stone. I stared in disbelief. His name was printed boldly at the top, unmistakable. Lucas handed me another set of documents. Research Partnership Agreement, TerraCore AgTech and United States Department of Agriculture, Year 3. I flipped quickly through the pages. Every line, every chart, every field trial plan was detailed. There were signatures from government advisors. Quarterly progress reports. A list of arid regions where his technology was currently being tested. Lucas, how long have you been doing all this? Since right after we got married. But really, it started even before that. I used to work at a private research institute, but I left. They cared only about profits. I wanted to create something that actually helped real growers. My throat tightened. All these years living together, I knew he was smart, diligent, deeply passionate about the land. But I had no idea he was an inventor. That he was running an actual company. That while the world mocked us as small-time farmers, my husband had been quietly changing the future of sustainable agriculture. I leaned on the table and looked up at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lucas exhaled, eyes never leaving mine. "Because I wanted to know who really believed in us. I wanted to see if a woman as smart as you, who once had every opportunity in the city, stayed because of something real. I didn't hide it to control anything. I hid it because, until it was big enough, I was afraid speaking out would only invite ridicule. I cried, not from pain, from emotion, from anger at myself, for all the times I doubted the worth of the life we'd chosen, just because of what others said." Lucas came closer and gently placed his hand on my shoulder. "Val, you didn't make the wrong choice. You saw what others couldn't, the potential in what they call ordinary. Just like you saw it in me. And in this land." I picked up the last stack of papers. It was a financial report. The number at the bottom almost made me gasp. "Nearly 80 million? Lucas nodded. "That's the valuation after our Series B funding round. But if the pilot projects in Texas and New Mexico succeed, we estimate it could double in the next 3 years." I sat speechless, then let out a soft laugh through tears. There wasn't a single sound louder that night than the beating of my heart. Turns out, all those years of being looked down on, called a farmer girl with no vision, I had been living inside a gold mine. And that gold wasn't money. It was vision, quiet love, and the patient resilience of the man beside me. I looked up at Lucas, truly saw him, and suddenly I understood. We had never been small. Others just looked in the wrong direction. And now they'd soon have to face the truth. Not through words but through action. Through the very value they once mocked. 2 days after the tense meeting at Lindsay's house, I received a message from my mother. "This Saturday the whole family is coming to the farm. Something needs to be clarified. Bring Lucas." No greeting. No pleasantries. Just a notice, like scheduling a staff meeting. I set the phone down and glanced over at Lucas, who was checking the temperature sensors in the greenhouse. He didn't look up, just asked quietly, "They're coming?" I nodded. "With their attorney." Lucas stood upright, brushing dust from his sleeve. "Good. I should call Foster too." Foster Klein had been the company's attorney since the early days of TerraCore AgTech. He was in his 60s, had a deep, steady voice, razor-sharp reasoning, and above all, the ability to silence an entire room with just one calm look. Saturday morning was clear and bright. A soft breeze rustled through the rows of corn, now a vibrant green. I brewed coffee and set out bottles of water. Not out of hospitality but as a basic courtesy. Lucas wore a crisp white shirt, dark jeans, and his old worn leather boots. He didn't dress to impress. He dressed like himself, simple, calm, and with nothing to prove. At exactly 2 p.m., 3 gleaming SUVs pulled into our dirt road, their tires kicking up clouds of red dust that clung to the grass along the path. I glanced out the kitchen window. My father stepped out first, still in his dark gray suit despite the heat climbing past 90 degrees. My mother followed closely, clutching a Chanel handbag. Lindsay was arm in arm with her personal attorney, a young man with slicked back hair and the familiar smug confidence of someone used to winning in courtrooms. Derek trailed behind, eyes on the ground, avoiding eye contact. Lucas opened the front door as they stepped onto the porch. His voice was calm and polite. "Come in." No one said thank you. They walked past me like I was the help. I led them into the living room where Foster was already seated. He stood, shook each hand with quiet composure, then sat back down, resting his leather briefcase on his lap and unfastening the latch. My father spoke first. "We're not here to waste time. We all know why we're sitting here. I brought the property transfer agreement. Our lawyer is present, and so is the prospective buyer. They're awaiting our response." Foster tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a student who had misunderstood the entire assignment. "I apologize," he said gently, "but before we discuss any matter related to transfer of ownership, I need to clarify a few points to ensure no one here misunderstands the legal nature of this property." Lindsay crossed her arms and leaned back in the chair, visibly annoyed. "Just say it." Foster smiled faintly, opened his case and pulled out a black leather folder. "This property, totaling 72 acres, is legally owned by TerraCore AgTech, an entity registered under the names of Lucas Nathaniel Stone and Valentina Carter Stone, the 2 individuals sitting in front of you. The land has no outstanding mortgages or financial encumbrances tied to any member of the Carter family or its affiliates. He flipped to another page and pointed to the financial section. Additionally, any initial financial support from the Carter family, if it occurred, has been fully repaid with interest, as reflected in 2 disbursement records dated 2019 and 2020. I can provide copies if necessary. My father frowned. Lindsay flushed red. My mother sat like stone. The young attorney next to them took the folder, scanned a few pages, then gave a reluctant nod. Lucas had been silent the whole time, his gaze watching every flicker of expression across my family's faces. When Foster finished, Lucas finally spoke. We understand the family is in trouble. But showing up with a contract to sell the land, without a single word of concern or conversation, says a lot. Lindsay shot up, slapping the armrest. Why do 2 nobodies get to hold what this family needs? Why is it that a piece of scrubland, a dirt farming dropout, and a daughter who walked away from college are suddenly the last hope of this entire family? Her words hit like an icy slap. I stood and walked straight to her. Because the people you think are worthless are often the only ones who won't trade their principles for a profit. My father rose, his voice sharp. This is about survival, Valentina. If we don't sell the land, we lose everything. And if we sell it, we lose everything we've built with our own hands, I said, eyes locked on his. None of you even asked what we're doing out here. No one cared what this farm was beyond its price tag. Foster closed the folder, tapping it lightly. I believe this is a good place to pause. Any request to sell this asset will not proceed without the agreement of both owners. Clearly, that is not happening today. The room grew thick with silence. Lindsay dabbed at fake tears with a tissue. My father turned away, his hand clenched in a fist. My mother rose and placed her hand on my shoulder. Sweetheart, reconsider. You can help. I gently removed her hand. Help? By giving up the life I chose and built just because others stumbled down the path they once proudly claimed was better? No one answered. I looked at each of them in turn. Derek couldn't raise his head. Lindsay avoided my eyes. My father swallowed hard. My mother turned away. I knew then, I now stood in a completely different place. Not above them, but no longer beneath. And that, it seemed, was what they couldn't bear. Lucas stood, walked to the pine filing cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a thick folder neatly clipped inside a black binder. No one in the room moved. Not a sound. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath. He placed the folder on the table, flipped a few pages, and slid it toward Foster. You'll know where to begin. Foster put on his glasses, skimmed the header, then slowly turned the binder toward my family. This is a detailed financial report from TerraCore's independent audit firm. It includes all stock transactions related to the company from last year to the present. Based on data from the SEC and trading platforms, we've identified a series of personal investments made through accounts at Pinnacle Equity Management, where Mr. Derek Carter is the primary portfolio manager. Derek flinched. Wait a minute. Foster raised a hand, continuing without looking at him. Within 6 months, Mr. Derek Carter initiated short positions totaling more than 200,000 shares of TerraCore AgTech, effectively betting the stock value would collapse. Notably, the funds used did not come from personal capital, but from the private retirement accounts of at least 8 clients, including Mr. and Mrs. Walter and Donna Carter. The room seemed to drop a level in temperature. My mother let her purse fall from her lap, staring at Derek like she didn't recognize her own son. My father stood, his voice cracking. You used my money to bet on your sister's failure? No, it wasn't like that. Derek stammered, face flushing, his voice shaking. It was a hedging strategy. No one thought TerraCore would. Lucas looked directly at him, voice low but steady. No one thought a farmer could win. Isn't that right? Derek fell silent. Lindsay sat frozen, lips trembling. My mother seemed hollow, drained of breath. She perched on the edge of the couch, hands gripping each other so tightly her nails pressed into her skin without notice. Why would you do that? She whispered, not clearly to anyone, perhaps to Derek, perhaps to herself. Derek buried his face in his hands, but no tears came. Foster straightened in his seat and pushed forward another folder. I've already contacted a representative at the SEC. They confirmed these trades are under preliminary investigation. If it's proven that there was intentional profiteering from insider information or unauthorized use of client funds, this could move beyond civil liability into criminal charges. Lindsay turned to her brother, eyes red. You said selling the land would fix everything. You never said this. Because if he had, I said instead, you never would have begged for him. She didn't deny it. She didn't look at me. No one did. My father slammed his hand on the table, for the second time that afternoon. We'll sue. We'll sue that girl for hiding information, for taking advantage of this family. No, you won't, Foster said, calm but firm. Your family has no legal grounds to sue Mrs. Vongina. There are no active contracts, no binding financial connections between the parties. And if a lawsuit is filed, I'm afraid we'd be forced to countersue for defamation and damages to reputation. He held up another piece of paper. Furthermore, all initial financial support from the family has been fully repaid with interest, as documented in the wire transfer dated June 10, 2020. Signed and acknowledged by Mr. Walter Carter himself. Here's the copy. My father snatched the paper and stared at his own signature. His face drained of color. I stood up. You've all gotten used to thinking I'll always be behind you, always smaller, always the child who chose the wrong path. But the real mistake is believing that degrees, stocks, or public praise are the only forms of achievement. I turned to Derek. You didn't just betray the trust of your relatives. You betrayed the very values you once claimed to uphold. No one forced you to invest in TerraCore. But you chose to oppose it in the most ruthless way. Derek kept his face buried in his hands, saying nothing. Lindsay, who was usually composed, suddenly burst into tears. What more do you want? You've already won. Do you want us to disappear? Do you want to watch this family fall apart? Lucas quietly stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. He looked at Lindsay, his gaze no longer gentle. We never tried to prove anything. We just lived according to what we believed in. The ones who turned it into a war weren't us. My mother lifted her head to look at me. Her eyes were filled with confusion and exhaustion. Well, I didn't know. My voice was soft, not accusatory. You didn't need to know. You just needed to believe. But you didn't. The air in the room thickened, as if years of silence, denial, and fractures were suddenly exposed, undeniable. And no one could avoid them. Not with tears, not with anger. Because truth, like a seed in the soil, will rise no matter how much dust someone tries to cover it with. I stood tall, arms relaxed at my sides, and looked at my father, the man who once taught me that family is the strongest foundation in life. Now he sat hunched over, fists on his knees, chin lowered like he was clinging to the last shred of dignity. I felt no triumph. Only sorrow. All my life, I said slowly, clearly, I was the disappointment. From the moment I chose environmental science instead of finance. From the moment I turned down the corporate law job the family lined up. From the moment I married Lucas. Every step I took, honest and committed, was dismissed because it didn't look like yours. But today it's clear. The so-called successful ones have become the real burden. And I, the one mocked the most, never bankrupted anyone, never took a single dollar from anyone, and never betrayed a single ounce of trust. The room fell into a chilling silence. My father still wouldn't lift his head. My mother blinked rapidly, her lips trembling as if searching for the right words but unable to speak. Lindsay stood up abruptly. Valentina, don't do this. What about Ellie? Her voice cracked, unexpectedly fragile. She loves you. Are you just going to abandon your niece? I looked at her, no anger left, just exhaustion. I didn't abandon anyone. You left me behind long ago. When you threw Ellie's 4th birthday party and didn't invite me. When you told her I was busy on the farm. When really you just didn't want me there because I didn't fit your image of the guest list. In that moment you chose who belonged and who didn't. I just learned how to stay away so I wouldn't get hurt anymore. Lindsay froze, her face flushed as if she'd been slapped. She turned away, one hand gripping the back of a chair, the other covering her mouth. I turned to my mother. You once said I chose the wrong road. That I'd regret it one day. But now it's clear. I live by my own work. And you're here today hoping the daughter you never believed in will save the family you once turned your back on. For the first time my mother cried. Not the forced tears of old arguments in the kitchen, but something quieter, deeper. She reached for my hand, thin fingers, nails still painted in her familiar nude shade. I'm sorry, Val. I just didn't want you to be left out. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze back either. I simply said, I'm not the one who's left out, Mom. You're the one who missed the chance to truly know me. Behind me, Foster was already gathering up the documents, securing his leather briefcase. He said nothing, didn't interrupt, just stood there, silent as a man who'd witnessed the final ruling in a courtroom where the verdict was already clear. Derek still had his head down, hands resting on his knees. The shiny brown dress shoes he probably wore to impress today looked so out of place on the worn wooden floor of our living room. He hadn't looked at me once since the truth was laid bare. I didn't wait for him to speak. Lucas gently placed his hand on my back. A soft touch, not hurried, not pushing. But I understood. It was time for us to go. I took a deep breath and turned one last time to face the 4 people who had once been my family. I don't need anyone to apologize. I don't expect you to make it right. I just ask one thing. From this moment forward, let my life be mine. And don't use the word family to chain it down again. No one responded. Lucas and I walked toward the door, Foster following behind. Just before I stepped out, I turned to look at my mother one last time. My voice was quieter now, but not cold. If Ellie ever asks why Aunt Val doesn't come around anymore, tell her the truth. That it's not because I don't love her. It's because the grown-ups built a wall too high between us. Then I opened the door. The late afternoon light flooded the dim room like a burst of water over dry land. And in that moment I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking away from the distorted image they had painted of me. Leaving behind every accusation wrapped in the disguise of love. A week after the confrontation with my family, when my heart had cooled into a quiet bed of ash, the phone rang while I was standing in the garden, hands still sticky with tomato sap. The caller ID said, Sophia Carter. I hesitated for a few seconds. Sophia was my cousin, the daughter of Uncle William, my father's brother, someone who rarely got involved in family drama, always kept her distance. I remembered clearly that when I left the city, Sophia had sent me one short message. If you feel peace, I'm happy for you. Not flowery, not taking sides, but the first words that made me feel not completely alone. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered. Val, are you free? I recognized her voice right away. Still that low, slow tone, but this time it had a slight tremble. I'm out in the garden. What's going on? I want to apologize. I didn't say anything. The wind rustled through the young kale rows, and the plastic sheets on the melon trellis crackled like whispers in the early sun. You don't owe me forgiveness, Sophia continued, but I need to say it out loud. I know Lindsay told me not to text you. I know the whole family treated you like a stain. And I stayed silent because I was afraid of being pushed out of the circle too. Her voice grew hoarse, but I didn't interrupt. I was a coward. I sat through dinners where they mocked you. I gave weak laughs. I told myself I was being neutral. But now I know, silence is a form of complicity too. I closed my eyes, not out of anger but from something else entirely. A quiet kind of pain. The kind you feel when a bruise starts to fade and healing begins. Thank you for saying that, I replied softly, like the way I speak to the earth when planting seeds. This morning I saw the news that TerraCore's research grant for Colorado was approved, she continued, and I just couldn't sit still any longer. I know I don't deserve it, but if you'll allow me, I want to come work there. Not just for the job, but because I want to start over. In the right place. I leaned back against the young pear tree behind me and looked out over the barley field glowing under the sun. A sparrow landed on the fence and chirped. What can you do? I asked. I studied project management, Sophia answered. But lately I've been part of an environmental data analytics group. I can help with research timelines, experiment planning, staff coordination, whatever you need. I smiled. You don't need to prove your value to me. I just need to know you're not here out of guilt, but because you believe in what I'm building. I do believe, Sophia replied instantly. I always have. I just never had the courage to stand beside you when everyone else dismissed you. But now I do. Then come, I said. The East Warehouse needs to be renovated into a group workspace. If you don't mind the dust, I can have you help Lucas redraw the utility layout. Can I start this Monday? The sooner the better. After hanging up, I stayed there for a long while. My hands still smelled of soil, the wind still moved through the trees, and inside me, there was a quiet relief I couldn't name. Maybe it was forgiveness. Maybe hope. Maybe just the feeling of a long-closed door creaking open, not to let someone in but to let light spill out. That afternoon, while Lucas and I were checking the irrigation lines in the cantaloupe field, I told him, "I'm thinking of bringing Sophia onto the team," I said. He didn't seem surprised. Just asked, "You think she's steady enough?" "Not sure," I replied. "But I think she's genuine. And sometimes that's rarer than competence." Lucas nodded, satisfied. "Someone finally gets it." I looked over at him. "Who gets what?" "You," he smiled softly. "You're starting to understand. Not everyone deserves to stay, but those who can own their mistakes and try again, they might just deserve a new beginning." I didn't answer. I just knelt down, placed a hand on the turned soil, and thought about the seeds buried deep below, growing quietly each day. Not because someone's watching, but because they know their time will come. 3 months after Sophia began working at TerraCore, an email landed in the company inbox from the Federal Office of Agricultural Development. The subject line was short: Approval Confirmation, Strategic Grant 2025 to 2030. I opened it, rereading every sentence as if blinking might erase the numbers. $12 million. 5 years. 4 pilot states. And one promise: to bring sustainable farming to lands where agriculture had nearly given up. Lucas stood beside me holding a mug of hot coffee. When I looked up, his hand was already on my shoulder, eyes filled with emotion. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. We just looked at each other as if the years behind us had collapsed into this one quiet moment. We announced the news to the whole team the next morning. Sophia was the first to cheer, followed by the young engineering crew from Colorado and the soil research unit in Iowa. One of the engineers wrote back, "The dream of our generation is no longer just theory." TerraCore entered its expansion phase. Lucas and I, along with the leadership team, started planning to hire local staff, train farmers, and redesign a remote management system that could monitor fields in real time. Sophia took full responsibility for federal coordination and legal documentation. She worked from 6 in the morning to 8 at night without a single complaint. During one weekend team meeting, she choked up a little and said, "I've never felt this useful before." Later that day, after everyone had left, Lucas turned to me. "Do you see it, Val? This place, it's not just our land anymore." I nodded. "It belongs to anyone who believes that a seed, if planted in the right soil, will find its way up." The second piece of good news came in early fall. We were both invited to be keynote speakers at the National AgTech Conference in Denver. Lucas was selected to present on circular farming innovations, while I was asked to share our journey transforming from a traditional farm into a data-driven sustainable system. The night before our speech, I stood in front of the mirror adjusting the collar of my white shirt. It wasn't designer. It was a birthday gift from Lucas last year. Stiff stitching, thick fabric, strong lines. But when I wore it, I felt an unexpected confidence. Lucas stepped behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, looking at me through the mirror. "You ready?" he asked. I turned to face him. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for a stage like that. I'm not a speaker. I work the soil, Lucas." He looked at me like I'd just said something completely untrue. "It's because you're someone who works the soil that people need to hear from you." The auditorium that day was packed with more than 700 people. Delegates from state agriculture departments, scholars, investors, representatives from soil conservation groups and crop development organizations. I walked onto the stage after Lucas, my heart pounding but my steps steady. I didn't start with charts or data. I started with a story. My name is Valentina Carter. I used to be called the disappointment of my family. Because I left the city for the countryside. Because I married a farmer. Because I chose to plant seeds instead of wearing evening gowns. But what I never expected was, the seeds I placed into that soil didn't just grow into plants, they grew into a future. I don't remember everything I said in the 15 minutes that followed. I only remember that when I finished, the whole room stood up and applauded. Sophia had recorded the entire speech on her phone. Over the next week, I received dozens of emails from strangers. "You are the voice for those who've never been heard. I cried because I too have been dismissed like that. That night, I stepped out into the hallway, standing alone as I looked out over the city of Denver glowing like a blanket of fallen stars. Lucas found me after a few minutes. "How do you feel?" he asked. I turned to him, eyes brimming for reasons I couldn't explain. "I feel heard." For the first time in my life, my voice wasn't cut off midway, wasn't met with eye rolls, wasn't crushed by some sarcastic remark. Lucas squeezed my hand. "And do you realize something, Val? It was your silence back then that taught you how to speak in a way others have to listen." I rested my head on his shoulder. "Back then I chose you. I chose the farm. I chose a life people called small. But I didn't choose wrong." He smiled. "Because you didn't choose noise. You chose roots." I nodded softly, still gazing at the scattered lights in the distance. And in that moment I understood, freedom isn't about shouting louder than others. Freedom is knowing where you stand, what you're doing, and why you chose this path, even if others laugh at it. Freedom is when you no longer need to prove your worth, because you live it every single day, in rows of crops, in the laughter of your partner, in the eyes of your team, and in the unshakable belief in what you're growing. I no longer needed anyone else's approval, because in the end I had finally accepted myself. What do you think of my story? Of someone once dismissed by her own family just for living differently? If you've ever had to stand alone in the face of doubt, if you've ever been forced to choose between dignity and kin, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments. Every story deserves to be heard. And maybe in your words someone else will find the strength to rise. And if you, like me, believe that sometimes the most precious thing isn't someone else's approval, but how you face yourself each day, please subscribe to this channel. Because my journey, and the journeys of everyday brave people, is far from over. There are still many stories to come, of family, of forgiveness, of choices, and of the things we thought we'd lost, but can still be found again. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.